April 1943. The tide of World War II hung on a single, ruthless lie. The Allies were preparing to strike the soft underbelly of Europe, Sicily. But there was a problem. Hitler knew they were coming. The beaches were lined with 300,000 German troops and panzer divisions. To win, the British didn't need more bullets. They needed a ghost. In a windowless basement in London, two intelligence officers, Ewen Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley, concocted a plan so paradoxical it sounded like a fever dream. They decided to use a dead body as a secret agent. They took a homeless man who had died of rat poison, dressed him as a high-ranking Royal Marine, and strapped a briefcase full of fake invasion plans to his wrist. Then, they dropped him into the freezing currents off the coast of Spain. This wasn't just a spy mission. It was a biological gamble with the fate of millions. This is a story of the man who never was, the corpse that outsmarted the Führer and changed the map of history without firing a single shot. The story begins not on a battlefield, but in the damp, cigarette smoke-filled rooms of Room 13 in the British Admiralty. This was the heart of the XX Committee, the 20 Committee, a ruthless group of intellectuals whose only job was to turn the German spy network against itself. Among them was a young, sharp-minded officer named Ian Fleming, the man who would later create James Bond. The challenge was impossible. The Allies were exhausted. After years of retreat, they were finally ready to invade Italy, starting with Sicily. But the military paradox was clear. Sicily was the most obvious target in the world. As Winston Churchill famously said, "Anyone but a fool would know it is Sicily." The Germans weren't fools. They had moved their elite divisions to the island, turning the Mediterranean into a death trap. If the Allies landed now, the sea would turn red with the blood of thousands of young boys. It was then that Ewen Montagu, a brilliant Jewish lawyer turned naval officer, and Charles Cholmondeley, a tall, eccentric RAF flight lieutenant, proposed the Trout Memo. The idea was based on a ruthless observation. A fly fisherman drapes a fly over the water, hoping a fish will rise to it. They needed a fly that Hitler couldn't resist. They needed a dead body that looked like a courier who had survived a plane crash only to die at sea. The human paradox of this plan was chilling. To save the lives of thousands of living soldiers, they had to disturb the peace of the dead. They needed a body that met specific technical requirements. It couldn't be a soldier who had died of visible wounds. It had to look like someone who had died of exposure and drowning after a crash at sea. They began a ruthless search through London's morgues, looking for a man with no family, no friends, and no future. A man who could become a patriotic ghost. They found their man in the basement of St. Pancras Hospital. His name was Glyndwr Michael, a 34-year-old homeless man from Wales who committed suicide by eating bread crusts smeared with rat poison phosphorus. His body was perfect. The poison had caused a slow death that mimicked the symptoms of a man dying of shock and exhaustion in the cold ocean. In a move of calculated ruthlessness, the British government officially stole this man's identity. Glyndwr Michael ceased to exist. In his place, Major William Martin was born. But a name wasn't enough. For the technical paradox to work, Major Martin had to be real. Montagu and Cholmondeley spent weeks building a legend for this corpse. They filled his pockets with the debris of a life. They gave him a fiancée named Pam, actually a photo of a beautiful MI5 clerk. They wrote fake, heartbreaking love letters from Pam, complaining about the war and their upcoming wedding. They gave him an overdraft notice from Lloyd's Bank, a receipt for a new shirt, and even ticket stubs from a London theater show. The level of detail was pathological. They even debated what kind of underwear a major would wear. They realized if a single detail was off, if his shoes were too new or his hair was cut in a non-military style, the Gestapo would smell a rat. They wore the major's boots themselves for weeks to break them in and give them the scuff marks of a man on active duty. They were engineering a human being from the ground up. The final piece of the ruthless puzzle was the letters of deception. These weren't just any letters. They were personal and private notes written by top Allied generals to each other. One letter, written by General Archibald Nye, accidentally mentioned that the Allies were planning to attack Greece and Sardinia, and that Sicily was merely a diversion. This was the fly for the German fish. If Hitler believed this letter, he would move his panzers away from Sicily, leaving the door wide open for the Allied invasion. But the biological paradox remained. How do you transport a dead body across 1,000 miles of war-torn ocean without it rotting? They had to build a special container, a steel canister filled with dry ice to keep the major fresh. They knew once the body left the cold of the morgue, the clock was ticking. The decomposition had to match the timeline of a plane crash. As the canister was loaded onto the submarine HMS Seraph in the dead of night at Holy Loch, Scotland, the officers involved felt the ruthless weight of their mission. This wasn't just a spy game anymore. The body in that tank was the only thing standing between a successful invasion and a catastrophic massacre. They were sending a dead man to fight a war that the living couldn't yet win. The submarine submerged into the dark Atlantic, heading for the coast of Huelva, Spain, a place crawling with German spies. The corpse of deception was on its way to meet its destiny. The HMS Seraph was a ghost ship in its own right. As it slipped beneath the surface of the North Atlantic, only the commander, Bill Jewell, knew the ruthless truth of his cargo. To the rest of the crew, the 6-foot-long steel canister labeled optical instruments was just another secret piece of equipment. But inside, packed in dry ice, was the cold, silent Major William Martin. The technical paradox of the journey was agonizing. The submarine had to navigate through minefields and U-boat patrols, all while the body inside the canister was slowly reaching its expiration date. If the Seraph was delayed, the decomposition would become so advanced that even a local fisherman would know something was wrong. On the morning of April 30th, 1943, the Seraph reached its destination, a few hundred yards off the coast of Huelva, Spain. This location was chosen with surgical ruthlessness. Huelva was a hotbed of German activity. The Nazi intelligence service, the Abwehr, had its best agents stationed there, led by a man named Adolf Klaus. The British knew if a body washed up here, Klaus would move heaven and earth to get his hands on it. At 4:30 a.m., in the pitch-black darkness, the Seraph surfaced. Only the officers were allowed on deck. The air was thick with the scent of salt and the ruthless chill of the pre-dawn mist. Commander Jewell ordered the canister to be opened. As the lid was unscrewed, a cloud of white carbon dioxide gas escaped, the last breath of the Muskoka-like coal that had kept the Major intact. The human paradox was never more visible than in that moment. Here was Glyndor Michael, a man who had died forgotten in a London slum, now being gently pushed into the sea by the most elite officers of the Royal Navy. They inflated his life jacket, a Mae West. They checked the secret briefcase that was chained to his trench coat, and they whispered a brief prayer. They weren't just burying a man at sea, they were launching a biological weapon of misinformation. Major Martin was pushed into the current. The officers then used the submarine's propellers to create a wash that would push the body toward the shore. They even threw an upside-down rubber dinghy into the water nearby to complete the technical illusion of a crashed plane. As the Seraph submerged and vanished, the Major was left alone. a silent sentinel floating toward the beach. The psychological impact of the plan began at 9:30 a.m. A local sardine fisherman, José Antonio Rey Maria, spotted a dark shape bobbing in the water. To him, it was just another victim of the ruthless war at sea. He hauled the body onto his boat and brought it to the port of Huelva. Within hours, the news reached the local authorities, and more importantly, it reached the ears of Adolf Klaus. The British, monitoring the situation from London, now began a game of intentional panic. They knew if they seemed too eager to get the body back, the Spaniards would get suspicious. But if they didn't act at all, it wouldn't look like an important loss. They sent top-secret cables to the British consul in Huelva, knowing the Germans would intercept them. The cables were desperate. Major Martin must be recovered immediately. The documents in his possession are of the highest importance. This was the paradox of reciprocity. The more the British begged, the more the Germans were determined to steal the secrets. The Spanish authorities, trying to play both sides, performed a ruthless autopsy. The doctor, Eduardo del Torno, noted that the man had died of drowning and had been in the water for about 5 days. This was exactly what the technical engineering of the 20th Committee had planned for. The rat poison in Glindor Michael's lungs had mimicked the fluid in the lungs of a drowning victim so perfectly that the doctor didn't suspect a thing. Then came the moment of truth. The briefcase was still chained to the major's wrist. The Spanish Navy, under pressure from the Nazi Abwehr, took the documents. But they were careful. They didn't want to leave technical traces. They used a ruthless technique, rolling the letters around the thin knitting needle and extracting them from the envelopes without breaking the wax seals. Inside the Abwehr headquarters, the tension was electric. They photographed every page. They saw the letter from General Nye about the invasion of Greece. They saw the personal letter about the sardines. They saw the love letters from Pam and the theater stubs. To the German intelligence officers, this was the holy grail of espionage. It was too detailed, too personal, and too human to be a fake. The ruthless deception was now in the German bloodstream. The photographs were rushed to Berlin, straight to the desk of Alexis von Rohn. Rohn was a brilliant man, but he had a human paradox of his own. He secretly hated Hitler. Whether he believed the documents or simply wanted to see Hitler fail is still debated today. He endorsed the documents as 100% authentic. By the time the Spanish returned the briefcase and the body to the British, the damage was done. The British officers checked the letters. They noticed a tiny, microscopic technical detail. A single black eyelash they had placed inside the envelope was gone. The fly had been swallowed. The trout had bitten. In London, a short, 3-word telegram was sent to Winston Churchill, who was then in Washington meeting with President Roosevelt. It read, "Mincemeat swallowed whole." The ruthless machinery of the Third Reich was now working for the Allies. Hitler, convinced that the corpse of Huelva had revealed the ultimate secret, ordered a massive shift in his defenses. He moved the 1st Panzer Division from France all the way to Greece. He moved an entire fleet of E-boats to Sicily's back door. He left Sicily, the true target, with a shattered defense. The human paradox was complete. A homeless man who had died in a basement was now commanding the movements of the most powerful army in the world. But the true ruthless test was yet to come. The Allies were about to land, and they were betting their lives that the Major's lie would hold. July 10, 1943. The Mediterranean sky was a bruised purple as the largest amphibious invasion in human history, Operation Husky, began. Over 160,000 Allied soldiers were hitting the beaches of Sicily. This was the moment of technical truth. If the mincemeat lie had failed, these boys were rowing straight into a meat grinder. But as the first ramps of the landing crafts dropped, the human paradox became a life-saving reality. The Germans weren't there. The ruthless efficiency of the 20th Committee had worked better than anyone dared to dream. Because of Major Martin's letters, Hitler was still convinced that the Sicily landing was just a fake-out. Even as thousands of British and American troops stormed the Sicilian sand, the Fuhrer was screaming at his generals to keep the elite 1st Panzer Division in Greece. He was so ruthlessly sure of the Major's documents that he thought the real invasion was still coming elsewhere. He had fallen for the psychological ghost. The German High Command was in a state of shattered logic. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, had been sent to Greece to defend against an army that didn't exist. Millions of dollars worth of Nazi equipment, fuel, and manpower were sitting idle in the mountains of Greece, while Sicily was being taken. The technical paradox was staggering. The Allies were winning the battle not with more tanks, but with a corpse in a briefcase. But the ruthlessness of war always demands a price. While the beaches were relatively quiet, the inland combat was fierce. The German troops that were left on the island fought with the desperation of men who had been betrayed by their own intelligence. The Allied soldiers, many of whom had trained in the cold forests of Canada, much like our little Norwegians, found themselves in a sun-drenched hell. The human paradox shifted to the German side. The German intelligence officers who had swallowed the mincemeat lie, men like Alexis von Rohn, now faced a ruthless fate. In the Nazi system, failure wasn't just an embarrassment, it was a death sentence. Rohn, who had validated the documents, began to realize that he had inadvertently helped the Allies. The reciprocity of his mistake would eventually lead him to a gallows in 1944. He had been outplayed by a dead homeless man from Wales. Back in London, Ewan Montagu and Charles Cholmondeley were monitoring the body count. For every mile the Allies gained in Sicily, they knew 1,000 lives had been saved by their biological gamble. They had turned ruthlessness into a form of mercy. Had Sicily been defended by the panzers sitting in Greece, the Allied casualties would have been in the tens of thousands. Instead, the soft underbelly of Europe was being cut open with surgical precision. The technical engineering of the lie continued even after the invasion began. The British kept sending fake radio signals about the second wave heading for Greece. They wanted to keep the ghost of Major Martin alive as long as possible. They were haunting the German radar. It wasn't until weeks later, when the Allies were halfway to Messina, that the German High Command finally realized the ruthless truth. There was no Major Martin. There was no invasion of Greece. The psychological impact on Hitler was permanent. For the rest of the war, whenever his intelligence officers brought him a captured document, he would scream, "Is this another mincemeat?" He never fully trusted his spies again. The 20th Committee hadn't just won a battle, they had destroyed the Führer's technical confidence in his own machine. They had injected chronic paranoia into the heart of the Third Reich. The final human paradox of Operation Husky occurred in a small, quiet cemetery in Huelva, Spain. While the world was burning and the ruthless machinery of war moved into Italy, a simple headstone was placed over a grave. It didn't say Glyndwr Michael, it said William Martin RM. The British government continued the lie even in death, paying for the upkeep of a grave of a man who never existed, to protect the secret of a man who had died for a country that had forgotten him. Glyndwr Michael, the unskilled man who had found no place in society, had become the most successful soldier of the 20th century. He had invaded Europe alone, without a gun, and won. The vengeance of the corpse was complete. But as the war moved on, the question remained: would the world ever know the ruthless truth about the man in the grave? Or was he destined to be a permanent ghost of the Secret Service? As the smoke cleared over the ruins of Berlin in 1945, the ruthless records of the Third Reich fell into Allied hands. Among the mountains of charred paper, investigators found the Mincemeat files. They discovered the lie had gone even deeper than they imagined. The Germans had been so convinced by Major Martin that they had ignored real high-level intelligence reports about the Sicily landings, dismissing them as Allied distractions. The human paradox was absolute. The most advanced military intelligence machine in the world had been dismantled by the corpse of a vagrant. For years after the war, the story of Major Martin remained a classified myth. The British government was ruthlessly silent. They didn't want the world to know how they had stolen a body for the war effort. But the psychological impact on the men who created him, Ewan Montague and Charles Cholmondeley, never faded. They had lived with the ghost of Glyndwr Michael for years. To them, he wasn't just a technical asset. He was a man who had given his afterlife to save the world. The technical paradox of the story took a cinematic turn in 1953. Ewan Montague, with the permission of the Admiralty, wrote a book titled The Man Who Never Was. It became an instant sensation. The public was obsessed with the ruthless brilliance of the plan. But even in that book, Montague kept the secret of the body's real identity. He claimed the man was a service member who had died of an illness. He couldn't bring himself to tell the human truth, that the savior of Sicily was a man who had died in a basement from rat poison. It was here that the James Bond connection became solidified reality. Ian Fleming, who had been in the room when the Trout memo was written, watched the public's reaction with keen interest. He saw how the world craved the paradox of the gentleman assassin, the spy who could be ruthless and elegant at the same time. Fleming took the engineering of a legend he had learned during Operation Mincemeat and used it to build the character of 007. Bond wasn't just a man, he was a technical construction of identity, much like Major Martin had been. But the ruthless ghost of Glyndwr Michael wasn't finished. In the late 1990s, an amateur historian named Roger Morgan decided to solve the final mystery. He began a forensic search through the St. Pancras morgue records of 1943. After months of digging through dusty ledgers, he found the entry for January 1943. Glyndwr Michael, age 34. Cause of death, phosphorus poisoning, suicide. Body removed by order of the Admiralty. The human paradox had finally been unmasked. The man who had defeated the Panzers wasn't a hero in a uniform. He was a shattered soul from a Welsh mining town who had moved to London and found only hunger and isolation. And yet, in the ruthless machinery of the 20th Committee, his tragedy became the Allies' greatest triumph. In 1998, the British government performed a final act of reciprocity. They ordered that the headstone in Huelva, Spain, be changed. They didn't remove Major William Martin. The legend was too important to erase. But they added a ruthless postscript to the bottom of the marble slab. It now reads, Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. The technical engineering of the lie had finally met the human truth. This is the ultimate paradox of Operation Mincemeat. It was a mission built on ruthless deception, but its legacy is one of deep humanity. We remember the lie because it saved the living, but we remember the man because he represents the common person, caught in the gears of history. The psychological impact of this story remains a standard for every intelligence agency in the world. It teaches the ruthless lesson that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a bomb or a bullet, it's the information you plant in your enemy's mind. As the sun sets over the cemetery in Spain today, tourists often leave flowers on the grave. Some leave them for the major, the dashing officer who died for king and country, but others leave them for Glyndwr, the lonely man who found a purpose he never asked for. Both men occupy the same 6 feet of earth. One is a legend, and one is a reality. Together, they represent the ultimate paradox of World War II, a war won by the greatest generation, but often saved by the man who never was. The vengeance of the 331 was fought with planes and fire, but the victory of Mincemeat was fought with silence and a single, ruthless corpse. Both are parts of the same Canadian and Allied legacy, a story of how, when the world was at its darkest, we turned our weaknesses into our greatest strengths. The ruthless success of Operation Mincemeat didn't just end with the liberation of Sicily. It fundamentally changed how the world understood power. Before this mission, war was about who had the most steel, the most oil, and the most men. After Major Martin, the world realized that narrative was the deadliest weapon of all. The technical paradox of the modern era was born. In a world of high-tech surveillance, the most effective tool is still a human lie, so well-crafted that it bypasses the brain and hits the heart. This story is the DNA of the modern spy thriller. When Ian Fleming sat down to write Casino Royale, he didn't just invent a hero, he recycled the ruthless cold-bloodedness he had witnessed in the Admiralty. James Bond is the living version of Major Martin, a man whose identity is a technical engineering project, whose life is a series of classified deceptions, and who operates with a human paradox of extreme elegance and extreme violence. Every time we watch a 007 film, we are watching a highly polished echo of a homeless man's corpse floating in the Spanish tide. The psychological impact on the intelligence community was permanent. To this day, the mincemeat strategy is taught at MI6 and the CIA as the gold standard of strategic deception. It proved that ruthlessness isn't always about killing. Sometimes it's about the mercy of preventing a massacre through a paradoxical trick. By using one dead man, the Allies saved the lives of approximately 30,000 to 50,000 soldiers who would have died on the beaches of Sicily. That is the reciprocity of Glyndwr Michael's tragedy. One life, lost to despair, gave back tens of thousands of lives to the world. Today, if you visit the town of Huelva, you will find a quiet, sun-baked cemetery. The human paradox is still alive there. Local residents often tell stories of the English major who saved their coast from the full weight of the Nazi war machine. They don't care about the technical details of the mincemeat plot. They care about the ghost who brought peace to their waters. In the final, ruthless analysis, Operation Mincemeat reminds us that history is not just made by great leaders like Churchill or Roosevelt. It is made in the shadows by lawyers, artists, and forgotten men. Glyndwr Michael never asked to be a hero. He never asked to have his identity stolen or his death weaponized. But in the biological lottery of World War II, he became the man who never was, so that we could be the people who are. The silent line of Little Norway and the corpse of Huelva are two sides of the same Canadian and Allied coin. They show us that when ruthless evil threatens to consume the world, human ingenuity will always find a way to turn the unskilled and the broken into the masters of fate. The lie of Major Martin was the most beautiful lie ever told, because it was told to protect the truth of freedom.